If I constantly find myself in a position where I'm just waiting for the motivation to come, it's not going to.
And just saying, I'm going to do this. Like, I'm going to carve out this time and I'm going to go right.
By far, the most effective periods that I've had for my writing have been the times where
I am Max.
I'm Drew.
And I'm Leisha.
Plot hole.
Said I'd write one chapter, wrote none.
I'm sorry, you do what?
I changed the ending again.
3 writers.
Countless blueprints.
Infinite stories. And now, into the story.
So this week we had discussed that we were going to talk about finding the motivation to write, or how we find motivation to write. I guess I just wanted to start off with a question for you guys. Is it really motivation that you think is important, or is it more discipline?
I'm going to have Max go first because I have a very specific way that I look at it.
She's having me go first because I have no motivation.
No, that wasn't what I said.
I feel like you have bursts of motivation, which I think is pretty normal.
Yes, that is very normal.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, and Leisha does have very like specific like way she does things. So I'll let her talk about. But for me, I do think it's and discipline versus motivation. They're so similar, but at the same time, like if you don't have that discipline to say, "Hey, I'm going to write," motivation doesn't ever comes. So I feel like for me, if I can get that discipline, like I'll find the motivation in there. Leisha and I talked about in the past about just doing things and motivation will come. So I think for me, discipline is probably the more important one. And just saying, I'm going to do this. Like I'm gonna carve out this time and I'm going to go right.
So I think I agree. I think for me it's definitely more of like a discipline thing, meaning I have to say, like you just said, I am going to carve this time out to write today, no matter what, you know, and that means I have to write today, even if I had a 12-hour shift at work today and I just got home and now I have to like clean the house and do the dishes or whatever. And the real thing is discipline is you're going to do it no matter what obstacles get in your way within reason, right? I mean, if you're coming up on 48 hours of no sleep, you should probably go to sleep instead of write. But having the discipline to write will then, I think, lead to having the motivation to write as well, because it's really easy to have an idea and then say, "Ooh, I really like this idea. I want to go write about this idea now." And then you spend a week or so, on this writing binge. You're sitting there writing 1,000 words a day. You're just crushing through this story idea, and then you lose a little bit of steam, and then you don't have the discipline to keep it going, and then the motivation kind of dies because other things get in the way, and then the story gets put on the back burner. The story gets put on the back burner. And so I think when you're attempting to write a book, personally, I think discipline is way more important, because writing a book feels, to me at least, more like a marathon rather than a sprint.
For sure. I can definitely see that being the ongoing process requires a level of commitment that isn't just isn't just motivation for motivation's sake, but a commitment to seeing it to the end. I feel like for me, there's a couple of things that kind of come together to help create my process when it comes to writing. Like Max said, for me, I understand that action has to precede motivation. I have to begin the act in order to start to feel motivated. If I constantly find myself in a position where I'm just waiting for the motivation to come, it's not going to. I'm always going to find a different thing that I'm going to be more interested in doing. So I often find that that is a huge pinnacle point for me. So just sitting down saying, this is going to be my time. And even if part of that time that I'm setting aside to write is putting myself in the zone. So like maybe it's listening to an album or doing some research on a specific thing for a character, working out a scene, and focusing on dialogue, which is one of my favorite ways to kind of get myself motivated. That tends to work the best. But one of the big things that I think works the best for me when it comes to the discipline aspect of writing is inspiration, which I think goes hand in hand, I think, for all of us in different ways. So I look for a lot of inspiration. So I wanted to throw that question at you guys. and kind of volley back and forth about it. Do you guys feel like inspiration plays a big role in your process? And what are some of your sources of inspiration?
Inspiration meaning like how inspired I feel to write the story, or outside sources that are inspiring me to get it done.
It can be a combination of the two. Like what are some things recently that have just kind of been speaking to you that have been both like something that you can look to as a source of inspiration, but also, just inspiration to get it done.
Okay, this might be, I don't know, this might not be very healthy, but my motivation to no longer be working in the field or in the career that I currently work is a huge source of inspiration for me. I I mean, we all have those moments, right, where we're just like, gosh, dang it, I hate my job so much. And it's not really because you actually hate your job. You just had a really bad day, or you had an extremely rude customer, or somebody called out and then didn't find a replacement. Whatever the reason is, you had a bad day, and then you get home that day and you spend an hour, swiping through Indeed looking for something new, right? And it's it's really bad, but genuinely, the inspiration to not feel this way about my career is a big one for me. But another source of inspiration is my desire to actually tell the story that I have in my head. I don't know. I just want to tell that story to people. I feel like it's an interesting story. I feel like it has entertainment value. It has the lessons that I want the story to portray could be good for other people, and that's a pretty good source of inspiration for me as well.
I definitely feel inspired to not do my job. No, I feel like for me, the inspiration comes from the story itself. Like, I have those moments of lucidity, where it's just, I get this idea in my head. So, yeah, you were saying earlier, Drew, that you get these kind of bursts of motivation where it can come and it just, you have write thousands of words in a week. But then as soon as like you kind of feel satisfied with what you've been doing, it starts to peter out. And that's how I've been feeling lately too. Is I'll get these great inspirations or ideas in my story where the character's gonna do something, or I'm motivated by like the magic system I'm creating or the world I'm building, and then all of a sudden, like after I finish a chapter or half a chapter, it's just starts to kind of peter out from there. So for me, I think I need to start looking for more inspiration elsewhere, inspiration to for motivation. Because it's getting to the point where I have this idea and I have the momentum and I'm losing it every time.
So I think it's kind of important then, when we're talking about motivation versus discipline, and how to channel and use both of those to address what some of the distractions are that we face in when it comes to wanting to write a book. I'll go first. After I have a long workday or whatever, right? I kind of, the thought of sitting down and continuing to write my story, while fun, doesn't sound like the most relaxing thing ever. And so instead, I'll watch a TV show, or more recently, I had some friends introduce me to some new like animes, and like those have been like really fun to watch. Or a big one is I'll just like sit down and just like, dude, I just want to relax and just like play some video games or something. I just want to chill and not really put too much brain power into what I'm doing right now. So what would you guys say is like some of the bigger distractions that keep you from maintaining a high level of motivation and discipline?
I agree with you 100%. Work is definitely a big one for me. I like to one of the things that I've been struggling with a lot recently is, especially in my job, a lot's required of me throughout the week that I feel very go 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 girl boss all week long. And so when it comes time to like really, I think, get into the mode of writing, or when I want to write, I feel like it's just another thing that I'm pushing myself to do. And that contributes a lot to just kind of my overall burnout. And as someone who really wants to make sure that I have enough bandwidth to, be patient with my husband and my son and be able to, accomplish the chores that I have to get done for the week and different things like that, I definitely have felt like sometimes writing ends up ultimately being the cost of it. Even though it's something that I enjoy, it is something that requires a lot of effort and bandwidth and time to be able to sit and do.
I found recently that I can't write after I get home from work. Just can't. Like it's just not going to be an option. I often get home late. I'm physically tired and I just want to do those things of just veg out, yeah. Yeah, watch a show, play a game. Sometimes just lay in the darkness and do nothing.
And brood.
Brood, which could be good for the writing spirit. But the most motivated I've felt for writing in recent months, actually in recent years, has been morning writing. And I'm not normally a morning person, but Leisha's shaking her head, like confirming that. But those mornings that I get up and I know like our family morning stuff is kind of finished up, and I've got a couple hours before work, and there's nothing really going on in the house, so I can take a step out or just pull out the computer and I can write for an hour or two. Especially, we talked last week about where we like to write, and the location's kind of important for me too. If I'm in a space where I can have easy access to things that distract me, I will take those distractions. So instead of trying to have this crazy willpower to resist the TV remote, I have to remove myself from the situation and put myself in a more public space. So that's why I like going to like a coffee shop. This past week, actually, when I got a little bit of writing done, I sat outside the coffee shop, which was really nice too. So I got a little bit more like fresh air on top of that too, and um, yeah. So I think location and even the time of day for me, where I can avoid distractions, is the best motivation for me.
I
Think through.
wanted to kind of go back to something that Leisha brought up, which was bandwidth, which I thought was really interesting because I've recently tried to do a lot of studying on how I can do better with focus because I feel as though I only have a certain number of like a certain amount of focus that I can dedicate to any given task in a day, right? And what techniques do you find work like best in order to have enough bandwidth at the end of the day or at the beginning of a new day to be able to dedicate some time to writing, to be able to dedicate some focus bandwidth time to writing?
It's funny that you mentioned that because I was thinking about this earlier this week. I had a work friend who was confiding in me about, we're in the same role and she's a little bit newer to the role. And one of the things that she's been really struggling with is she feels so overwhelmed all the time. And I remember when I first initially started the role that I currently occupy, I felt exactly the same way. There's like there was never any downtime. I felt like there was constantly stuff to do. And I got a piece of advice from another coworker that really changed my kind of mindset when it came to bandwidth. So that piece of advice, although it may sound bad, and I'll kind of elaborate a little bit more, is that I can't dedicate 100% of myself to everything that I do. Other things that I have to be really conscientious of is that if like even if I dedicate like 50% of myself to a task, I'm still going to do a good job. That's one of the things that I had to remind myself and be confident in. Even just approaching some of my like smaller work tasks with that mentality made it so much easier to get through a week and not feel totally burnt out by the end. I Sunday night or is my quote unquote Friday, and that is actually the night that I have the most energy because I did all like I grind throughout the week, get everything set up so that once my Monday rolls around on Wednesday, I'm ready to hit the ground running. A lot of it has come down to that discipline of really making sure that I'm dedicating only a certain amount of internal effort. Part of the issue I think that and women face this I think more so than men in a lot of ways, specifically like our heteronormative relationships. Where there's often an invisible load. Like as a wife and a mom, I'm often thinking of 100 different things. Like, oh, I have to make dinner tonight. What's in the cabinet? Oh, I'm seeing that we're missing this ingredient, this ingredient, this ingredient. I need to add that to the shopping list. I need to make sure that I move money over to be able to go to the grocery store. If it over, or I have to make sure that our schedules line up. If it doesn't, I have to remember to drop Max off at work. If it conflicts with our son's nap time, what is that going to end up looking like? So this is just one small decision that becomes a million micro decisions. And so oftentimes when I'm talking about bandwidth, that occupies a ton of it. So getting back to the point, something that I've realized, especially when it comes to writing for me, is that even if I just dedicate like 50% of myself or 30% of my effort, I'm getting the work done. And maybe later when I can dedicate the 100%, I can really dig into that and just allow that 100% to add flourish wherever it may go. Because I'm capable of really great work, even if it's just dedicating that 30 to 50%. But it means I don't feel completely depleted by the process of writing.
And
I would like to add.
yeah, I was gonna
Oh,
ask you,
wait.
Max. No, yeah, I was gonna ask you. Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Well, I want to add to that. Planning ahead is important. I think about like trying to manage that bandwidth, and especially when it comes to like if you're in a relationship or you have other responsibilities like children or just your jobs in general too. You do have to think about those micro decisions that need to happen during the day, and about your partner, and about what they need, what your children need, what your friends need, what your work needs, everything, all those things. And that can be overwhelming. So I think planning ahead for when you're going to write is helpful. I haven't found a time that works for me every day. I know that's like a big advice piece that everyone gives online. All the famous writers say it. I just have not found a time of day that works for me every single day. Mornings seem to be about that zone, but there's a lot of mornings where I gotta watch Jackson, and I gotta watch and I gotta we gotta do other things. We gotta run some errands or things like that. That I just can't carve out that specific time of day. But I think planning ahead, even just the day before, saying, "Hey, okay, we figured out this. We don't need to go to the store tomorrow. We don't need to do this. We're good with that. Somebody's watching the baby. We're all good with this. I have time to write, and I'm going to choose to use that time to write. But if I don't tell myself that the day before, wake up with the motivation to do that in the morning because I'm not planning on doing that already. I have no plan for the day, and therefore have no bandwidth for anything. I have to create the bandwidth, is what I'm trying to get at.
And creating bandwidth is hard because it feels as though you almost have a limited amount of it. It feels like a resource that you use up each day. And so, creating more of it is sometimes a bit of a harder process. But I think you bringing up planning ahead was really great because by far the most effective periods where that I've had for my writing have been the times where I have sat down with my family, with my wife and my two kids, and I just said, "Hey guys, dad wants to have some time to write tonight. Can you guys give that to me?" Getting the family involved to not only help keep you accountable, but also help them feel part of the process, and planning ahead that time with them has actually been has led to some of the most effective periods of writing that I think that I've ever had. Bringing that up, I should probably be better about it, but my wife is a super type A person. She has to plan everything. Everything has to have a plan, has to have an itinerary. And when I met her, I was very much a spontaneous, go with the flow type person. But, and I'm not saying that, being a type A or a type B person is, the correct way or the incorrect way to live your life. But if you want to be a writer and you want to go through this process, planning out time and setting apart time and you can go to your family and say, hey, or you can go to your roommates and say, hey, I need, this hour or two where nobody's going to come knock on my door. Nobody's going to come distract me. This time is my it's sacred. It's my sacred writing time. Please don't come bother me. I love that piece of advice of planning ahead. That was so great. I love that.
I'm also a pretty type A person, and Max is a type B person, if you couldn't tell. But something that I think I've come to appreciate is that I think, as someone who's very type A and who married a type B, I think what I've appreciated the most about I think how our relationship is developed, that I think we've kind of developed into type C people.
A type C team.
Yeah. Where it's kind of like, I think we've both adapted to creating plans, but being willing to be adaptable and flexible with whatever the day or the week's going to throw at us. I think that that's something that's really helpful when it comes to really being on the same page. I haven't always been the best about it. I think I allow a lot of my sometimes perfectionistic tendencies or control tendencies or whatever the case might be, that I think can be not only personal obstacles, but obstacles for Max to be able to set aside the time that he needs to write. But something that I think helps is when he initiates, like, wanting to plan ahead.
The other day, I'd gone to go write and everything, but I started my writing and I got a little bit done, but I was so tired. I was literally falling asleep at my computer. Um, and I had to kind of pull myself away to go take a nap and everything because I just was like, I was so drowsy. And it felt like at the time, like, oh, I wasted this time I had. But like looking back on it, I didn't. I used that time to the best of the ability that we had. Because the life is gonna happen. That's like the bottom line, is that all these steps and tricks and everything that we're talking about is just that they're tricks. Like sometimes they'll work, sometimes they won't. And you just have to kind of take that time, whatever time you can carve out, and just use it to the best of your ability. And I look back on that time and said, "Hey, I actually fleshed out a little bit of what I wanted to, a little bit of world building. I didn't get much, actual writing done in the body of my story, but I did get a little bit done that will help me the next time I need to write."
Very briefly, writing groups. I think writing groups
Yeah.
are a great way to keep your motivation and your discipline pretty high because you have responsibilities and accountability, I guess is a better word, to other people other than just yourself. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like it's really, really easy to just let myself down because it's me. No one else is judging me. I'm just judging myself. Like letting myself down feels really easy. But when we all agreed that we were going to report to each other what our daily word count was, and while we're not perfect every single day, I definitely feel as though it has been a small bump in my writing productivity time. What would be your advice to other people who are listening to this right now and they're like, well, I don't have any family members or close friends that are writing. How do you go about finding I guess a writing group to join or to have those other people that can make you accountable? Because it's hard when somebody who's not a writer, when you ask somebody who's not a writer to help keep you accountable, like you ask your mom, right? Say you're a teenager, you want to be an author one day, and you go to your mom and you're like, "Hey, mom, can you help me be accountable?" Maybe your mom, if she's not a writer, isn't gonna fully be. Like, she's obviously gonna be supportive. She's your mom, but maybe something gets in the way and she forgets or whatever, right? How do you go about finding writing groups specifically? in order to help with discipline and motivation?
I think I can speak to this a little bit more because all of my writing up to this point has always been solitary. Like I mentioned in episode 1 that I have been a lifelong journaler, and that is very solitary. That's very like self-motivated, self-discipline, so on and so forth. When I became an adult, and I kind of experienced this with reading as well, throughout high school and college, I just didn't feel motivated to read. And writing, it was the same situation, especially when I got to college. Um, I filled my time in other ways, and that was when I wanted to spend more time with friends and just kind of live life, get to travel, different things like that. So actually coming into this group and Max kind of extending the invitation was a little daunting for me because I still struggle with a lot of internalized shame about my writing, where it's hard and it's vulnerable sometimes to just put myself in that situation. But then I also simultaneously remember that you guys understand the difficulties and the path overall when it comes to writing something or just creating something in general. So I think one thing that I think we have access to now that is eons ahead of some of the greatest writers of our time is that is the internet and everything that we do. And it's an amazing platform and community to be able to find like-minded people in order to really push yourself. Like I think of like growing up, I was a big Tumblr user at the time, and I found so many incredible people that were like-minded and that like even though I didn't really know them IRL, it was cool to just be able to interact with them and check in with them, kind of do those things. So I know the internet has been a big resource to me in the past. Additionally, just like reaching out to the friends that I do have, even if they aren't specifically writing, I have friends that are being committed to something. So I have a really good friend of mine who draws, and like that is the thing that he loves to do. And I would periodically check in with him to see like, what have you been working on? Have you been motivated to do anything? Like, not really. And so we actually went back and forth on things that, inspire him. And I was actually able to send him a couple of ideas. It's the little things like that that I think can ultimately extend to writing groups as a whole. Like here, it was just you had come to Max as someone who is interested in writing to talk to someone who has had more experience about writing. And that was honestly the inception of like our writing group as a whole. So sometimes it's just being willing to ask. Like the power of asking, I don't think we talk about enough when it comes to kind of the inception of being able to create communities, because that's ultimately our hope, is to be able to create a supportive community, even, if right now it's just the three of us and our families. I think that has been a big aspect of it. So I think just don't be deterred by, I think, your inner critic or your inner voices that, tell you that you should keep your writing to yourself or that it's not good enough, it's not finished yet, different things like that. Pushing past your personal boundaries makes it so much easier to just reach out and ask.
I would say to just like asking, just talk about your writing. If you don't have anybody to write with necessarily, or to speak about that you don't feel like is as motivated about it as you are, or as you want to be, I think just talking about it. I have friends that like I'll I'll talk to them about stories that I've written or wanted to write, and just in conversation they'll bring up randomly at times like, hey, are you still working on that thing? And then that kind of reactivates a little bit of motivation here and there. So if you don't have a writing group necessarily, I think just having conversations about your writing, because it's something you care about, and people that care about you care about things you care about. Just going with that and using that as a pathway to find people that maybe say, hey, actually, you know what? I've always wanted to write a story too. And then, you're like Jira and said, hey, I have this great idea and I'm going to tell Max about it. And I'm going to get started on it. Then Max will have about 6 or 8 different ideas and finally settle on one.
It's really great that you brought that up actually, because I think that the desire to write a book is a lot more common than people believe it is. I feel as writers, a lot of us are introverts, or maybe not even introverts, but just potentially nervous or uncomfortable talking about our desire to write a book because we think that maybe it's not the most popular thing ever. But while you were talking about that, I actually just Googled like what percentage of people have said that they want to write a book. Have said up to 81% of people in the United States have said that they have at least a desire to write a book. I think with that in mind, like you said, just talking about your writing, bringing it up to people will actually end up being a lot more relatable than a lot of people think that it is. Because whenever I've casually brought up in conversation, when somebody, I'm getting to know somebody, they ask me what I do, and I'm like, oh, I do this thing for my job, but I'm not really a huge fan of it. If they're any kind of good conversationalist at all, they'll almost always follow it up with, oh, well, then what do you want to do? And then that's a really good opportunity for me to say, oh, well, I actually, my dream is to be an author. And it has never once landed flat in a conversation with anybody. Everyone is always so interested and so supportive. And then they'll throw something and they're like, oh, well, actually, I have this really cool idea for a book that I've mulled over, writing it for a while now, but I just have never had the courage or whatever. And that's a really easy, simple way to like talk to somebody and like you said, Leisha, start a group, start a conversation about writing, and then it can lead to like you guys putting together a little writing group where you check in on each other and offer critique and criticism to each other's work, but in a space that feels safe and the criticism that you're going to receive is actually like legitimate and real, good criticism, and it's not just, I don't know, them randomly spewing stuff about your book, but that would be probably one of the ways that I say being able to put a writing group together is good, is talk about your writing. My dad is really fond of this saying of, so my dad's a huge business guy. His whole thing is he starts and runs businesses, and he's got like, I don't know, I think he runs like a couple dozen businesses or whatever, or at least or at least he's a consultant on a lot of them. But his big thing is everybody loses sales because they're too nervous to talk about what their business is. And I think being able to have those conversations with other people about your book or about your desire to write a book is really important in developing and building a group that is going to help kind of build a support system for you.
I think what rings true about what you said is that fear of reaching out permeates a lot of things within my life personally. One of my biggest coping mechanisms that I found I've really leaned into throughout my life is that when everything starts to get really hard, I just isolate. Like, I push everybody away. I do everything possible to kind of cut myself off from the world. Um, and throughout my life, I've actually realized that one, it's very unhealthy. Two, it doesn't make me feel better. Like, it really doesn't. And so I kind of get into like these modes of self-sabotage. And one of the things that I really struggle with periodically is just asking for help. Like, it's just saying, I need someone right now. And I think that when it comes to our creativity, like, there's very little that you can equate to from a vulnerability aspect. Like, when it comes to like bring out your soul onto a page, or over your keyboard, or whatever your medium is, and there's very little that you can compare that to. And I think sometimes just like the aspect of being afraid to talk about it stops that like 81% from ever really trying to achieve what they want to do, even if they've spoken it into existence. But that's obviously step one. It's just making the additional steps to kind of get to the point where this is something I really want to do. This is something I'm passionate about. So I think we allow our passions to become a reality when we do speak them into existence and we share that vision with other people. I think that's not something that we should like just skim over. How did we come up with the ideas for our stories? Because that is something that, like, for you, Drew, I actually don't know how your story kind of came into existence. I listened to Max talk about his stories and his ideas 24/7, vice versa, you know? So it's one of those things where, like, we've been with each other throughout this process, but I'd love to hear from you, like, what inspired you or what was the thing that made you think, like, I have a novel that I want to write?
Nothing says motivation like actual inspiration to write something.
Yeah.
When it comes to developing my stories and what that process looks like, it actually just starts for me with an idea of. So I'll give a little hint into the book that I'm writing right now. It uses thread magic or string magic, right? And I just was sitting there thinking about a story that used something similar, and I was like, "Ooh, that could be like a really interesting concept in this context, in like this setting context, right?" And so for me, it's just cool idea plus interesting setting, and then you just sprinkle in some interesting circumstances, makes for a good story that I feel like I would want to share. And while that doesn't really sound super inspired, once I get going, it kind of turns into a snowball that rolls down the hill, and I get more and more excited and more passionate about it. I don't know if, Leisha, you've ever listened to me have conversations with Max about my ideas, but I feel like I get overly passionate about ideas and things, but I would say that's probably one of my strengths. Is I'm an idea guy. And
I was gonna say, don't talk down on yourself about how your ideas that you feel like overly enthusiastic about it. I know I have in the past felt like, wow, this is a great idea and I love it, and then I think too much as if I was another person thinking about it, and then I get in my own head and say, wow, actually someone else might not think this is good. If you think your idea is good, like, don't downplay that. Just believe that about yourself.
The literal first thing that came through my mind as Max was talking was like, well, if it isn't the pot calling the kettle black.
I know. Okay, I've been the person that gets in my own head about, well, it doesn't work, doesn't do this, doesn't do that. But for me, at least, that's where I need to be motivated. Is I need to believe that my story can work. And if it's not working and I don't believe it's working, I need to maybe move on to something else or try something new. Maybe come back to it eventually and give it a second shot. But until I believe in it, like you're saying, like you have this like intense belief and passion for your ideas, that's so great.
I think ideas are pretty cheap, honestly, for the most part. It's the author's ability to make those ideas and the characters that fall within those ideas interesting. And I'll give a quick example of this. Red Rising. I don't know if you guys have read that series.
I
But
think I've heard of it.
so Red Rising is a dystopian sci-fi book. And when my wife read it first, when she described the book to me, like the idea of the book, I was like, this is the most juvenile, stupid idea I've ever heard. But then but then I read the book and I was like, wait, this is so good. So the idea behind the book is that humanity in the future is separated into colors, which determines their like socioeconomic status. And the colors, are sometimes, in some cases, genetically superior or inferior to each other, and they're like fighting for global domination or whatever against each other, right? Like the lower socioeconomic colors rise up against the higher socioeconomic colors and rebel. It's like super generic, right? But but like the idea of people separated being separated into colors, it just sounded like so juvenile and dumb to me that I was like, this is ridiculous. There's no way that this book is going to be good because this idea, it's silly. But then I read the book and the characters are so compelling that you kind of forget about the color system that exists in the background. and you just get swallowed up in the story and the circumstances that the characters are in, because the circumstances that they're in don't necessarily need to be believable. They just need, like, the characters need to be compelling, the story needs to be compelling. So I feel like ideas in that frame of reference are actually really cheap. They don't need to be really good.
I don't want to downplay the importance of imagination, and I love that you brought that up because I was very similar as a kid. Like, mind you, I had the opposite kind of situation. I grew up in a really big family. I have 5 brothers and a sister. I lived with all of them throughout most of my life. I was never alone. There was always constantly something going on. Someone had a baseball game. We had to go do this thing. We have to run errands. Oh, we're gonna sit down for a family meal. You know, different kind of things like that. I also had an abundance of parents, so it was. I always had extra fingers in the pot. My imagination was my escape. Like, this was my me time. I remember, and it's not silly at all, like the examples that you brought up, because like one of the distinct scenarios that I remember having was I was in high school and I was sitting on the bus on my way to school, and I was just imagining what the bus would look like underwater. Like, I was wondering like what it would be like to travel on this bus as if it was traveling underwater. And like that is something that I frequently kind of go back to as something that I have always really appreciated about my ability to just imagine sometimes the impossible. And I think that that's a really important component. And I agree with you. Like, ideas are cheap. It's all the things that you invest into it that build the value, right? But I think that that doesn't diminish like the importance of those ideas when it comes to spurring on what becomes our stories. Like, I actually remember specifically when I brought up the idea to Max. It was actually was it our anniversary? Oh, it was Max's birthday. And we were on the way. I had like gotten us a hotel room for the night, got a babysitter. We were gonna go out to dinner. We were on our way out to our destination, and I looked at Max and I said, "Hey, so I've been kind of thinking about a story idea. I've been thinking about writing again." And throughout our marriage, I always like kind of thought to myself, I was like, Max is the writer. I can do something else. And I've tried so many hobbies, and none of it has resonated with me in the same way that writing has. And I guess we can talk about like comparison and what that kind of looks like in a different episode. But I started to tell him about kind of my idea. And I honestly don't even remember. Like, it was a combination of like little things that I had kind of collected. And I was like, this would actually be like a really funny story to tell. I remember he looked over at me and all he said was, "That's a really good idea." And it gave me the confidence boost, like a confidence boost unlike anything I'd ever had from a writing perspective.
I'd like to add to this too that we then talked about her ideas like more like off and on like longer car drives and stuff like that. There were times where I'd say things like that and Leisha would go, "I didn't think you were gonna like this at all." Like, but it's like, if you have this great idea and you're passionate about it, like Leisha writes contemporary romance. That's what she reads. That's what she loves. I have such a hard time writing romance. Like, and I don't find like always find the appeal in it to have it in writing, but she's passionate about it, and that makes me really excited about it. I always compare it to I've never been a big country music fan, but if you're in a car with somebody who loves country music,
Yeah.
it's the best. It's so much fun. I think just passion for your ideas is humongous. It's infectious, yeah. Even if it's not like, even if it's everyone's sorted into colors and guess what? You're divergent and you have 6 different colors. I don't know. I'm just making fun of stuff now.
That was a crazy crossover.
Yeah, you like that? That was great. But even then, if you're passionate about it and you have the drive to write a compelling story about a character in those circumstances, in those situations that you find interesting, you can always find something there.
Yeah, I also think of realize as a writer, like one of the things that I have to remember, especially like because fantasy is actually a genre that I really struggle with. And I always have. I have no idea why. I used to love reading fantasy. Like I I remember growing up, like, obviously, some of the books that were coming out when we were kids were things like the Harry Potter series, and obviously, we had that big dystopian wave of like the Hunger Games and Divergent, and kind of things along those lines. I got really into the Magic Thief, kind of along those lines. And for some reason, as I got older, especially as I transitioned into middle and high school, I went on like a anti fantasy high horse, I guess. It was just so hard for me to get into it. And I remember when I this actually was probably a decent ways into our marriage, and I realized that Max was like really into fantasy, like really, really into fantasy. Like it's all he reads. And I was like, I don't know if this is something that I can get into. And I would try because that is something that I try to do as a partner is get really invested in the things that Max likes. Even if I don't walk away with it for the same passion, I get it. Like I really it's also a great way to spend quality time together. But like one of the things that I had to really teach myself, and this is a phrase that I heard someone use and I've used it ever since. I'm not going to yuck somebody's yum. Like,
That phrase just makes me laugh. I don't know why.
I'm not going to yuck somebody's yum. Especially when I hear Max talk about his ideas of fantasy or the ideas that he's really passionate about, or even just like stuff that like one of the ideas that he was tossing around that, we thought he was going to ultimately end up fleshing out as a novel. I was really on board. I loved the idea. I loved the idea of like a panthology of gods and all the kind of things that he was thinking. Just because I don't 100% understand like the appeal of the genre specifically, I am passionate about the ideas that kind of come from all sorts of sources of inspiration. So that has been something that I've been thinking about a lot recently is like as I'm, even though I'm writing in a very niche kind of area of writing, I actually have grown to appreciate more writing as a result of it. Like the deeper that I get into my own kind of research and process.
So you brought up something that I kind of wanted to steer our conversation towards a little bit, if that's okay. You brought
Mhm.
up Max's idea of having like a pantheon of gods or that kind of stuff. And that seems really large in scope. And for the people who are trying to write something that requires extensive world building, Max, more specifically to you, what's your advice for them to get started? Because that process seems kind of daunting initially.
I was gonna just say don't, but no. This is coming from somebody who. So we've talked about our writing inspirations where we started. I've written stories since I was a kid. Around when I was like about 12 years old, I took a novel writing class, and that was it. I got the bug, and ever since then, that was the only book I ever finished was in that class. After that, I had started so many dozens and dozens of stories, and I fleshed out huge worlds, and I spent literal years. Actually, at one of them, I spent over a decade just planning and never really finding the motivation to actually sit down and write it. So, what I'll say about if you have a big idea or a big world is get some of the basics down and then just start writing because you're gonna discover things. So I have been a we talk about architects and gardeners,
Mhm.
right? I have been an architect my whole writing life, and I realized that it's okay to stop and garden after I finish a blueprint. I've designed this garden. I'm gonna sit down and I'm actually gonna start planting some seeds. And so I think for world building for me is I might have to pause here and there to flesh some things out to figure out some more about my world, but it's okay. I will figure it out, but I have to be in the world to figure it out. I have to, yeah. That was very definitive.
That was quote
Pen
worthy. Let me
point
write
there.
that down. Hold on.
Yeah, you got to be in the world. You gotta like have this idea and start it. So what was difficult for me with the story idea that Leisha and Drew both touched on, you guys both touched on, is I had this idea for basically a world that was used as a coliseum for the gods, and it was basically just these titans that would fight and for sport and everything, and the people of the world were kind of just the victims of their fighting. And it was a great idea, but I had such a hard time inserting myself into the world, like figuring out where, like, how to get in there, how to get in the world. What does it feel like? What does it work? How does it work? Kind of thing. And it was a little bit of too grand a scope, literally, because they were giant titaness gods. But I still want to go back to that eventually. Like I'll go back and I'll try and come back to that eventually. Because it's got huge potential, and I like the idea of the scope, and I like epic kind of finales and big battles and things like that. But for now, I'm really happy writing a down to earth fantasy mystery. That's where I'm going for. And there's still plenty of this world to explore. I just needed to scale it back a little bit too. So, my advice for world building junkies is come up with a great idea, come up with a cool setting, cool characters, and get in there.
I no, I
I
actually
like
did write down that quote though. You have to be in the world to finish it. Because like I don't think you realize how insanely like good that little nugget of information was. Because as a world builder, because I had to do some pretty extensive world building for the novel that I'm working on, and it just felt so zoomed out and detached. But in order to like really get down to the nitty gritty of it, like writing a book, you're in somebody's head, you're in a character's head, and so you have to be in the world to finish it. You have to be down on like in the character by character, their daily lives level to be able to finish it. And I also liked the advice that you gave of there are some things that I don't have to know the answer to. I can cross that bridge when I get there type of world building. And I think this is especially true for people who play tabletop role play games like Dungeons and
Oh,
Dragons
no.
or whatever else. Like you get you get caught up in the world building of it all. But at the end of the day, the story is about the people. Or in D&D's case, it's about your players. It's about their characters that they're playing as. So getting down
I'm
to that individual level is really important.
I'm literally so excited that you brought that up because that was like the first thing that I thought of when it came to world building. At least from what I understand, like as a contemporary romance writer, the world's there. What the world building that I'm doing is character building. So that I think in and of itself is a type of world building, but it's very different. Like I'm not building like a concept from the ground up. Like I can base it off of normal human things, which is great. It's a great framework. It's worked for however many people it's worked for throughout all of history. Like our stories get to be told. But as someone who has played some pretty extensive campaigns, especially throughout the last couple of years with D&D, that principle of collaborative storytelling that I've come to really appreciate is like with our DM specifically, we brought a story that he created to life. And that is something that I feel so privileged to have been a part of. And that I know he's expressed his appreciation for us in so many ways. But I think like helps so much is just that willingness. Like, even though, we're writers and we're the ones writing our stories, when you think about what a dungeon master has to do, especially someone who homebrews a campaign, they build the world and they decide to share it with with a group, with a party, and allow them to build upon it, like to be the one that stacks story up, no matter how that looks. Like even if it goes in a completely different direction or like climax than the DM was anticipating, it's the. I guess this is a question that I can ask you both. Do you guys feel like you'll eventually get to a point where as you're writing your story there's going to be things that you're surprised by, or have there already been things that you've been surprised by as you guys have been going through the process of world building and fleshing out your stories?
Oh yeah. I was most surprised by the fact that I could actually discovery write. I could actually just write and things would come. The other thing I was surprised by, at least most recently, is that like I'm capable of writing like a grim dark story. I've thought about like the style before, but like once I in my first chapter, at least as it is as it stands right now, my first chapter, I kill somebody off like in the first chapter. I remember I had Drew read. You had you read the part of it, and
Banger
you
first
messaged me
chapter,
and were
by
like,
the way.
I had him. And he messaged me and goes like, "No, not my poor boy,"
Dude,
something like that.
but your ability to make me care about that character in just a couple of pages was so good. That was I was devastated when he died.
So that's what surprised me was that like I didn't even that wasn't even like a main character. He just kind of appeared out of thin air, and I needed to have him exit stage left, and I was like, guess we'll just kill him off. And I realized actually that fits the tone of the story. Is that bad things happen and it's a dark world sometimes. And then so anyway, so I think that's probably what surprised me most is that I was capable of killing my darlings, I guess you could say.
I think something that has surprised me with world building and writing is I'm having to like think about things that I wouldn't normally think about because you build this world, right? You have all these cities and all these towns, and then I don't know how other people world build, but then I've gone through and tried to create like a brief like paragraph or two of like what the culture in that part of the world looks like, what the people are like there, what's the industry that you know that it like drives their economy and that kind of stuff. But then I wrote this scene and where two people are on like two almost opposite ends of the planet, but they're going to meet up in this other area, and they're supposed to be happening at the same time. But I realized like as I was writing it, I was like, wait, would it be nighttime here during this like part of the day? Well, like while it's daytime for the other character who's experiencing something at the same time. And I don't know, like those kinds of thoughts I guess surprised me that I would even consider that, you know, like the rotation of the planet in like with the sun and stuff. And so but something else that surprised me is how I disagree with myself on my initial outlining of characters. So I outlined this one character and I had her be like this. She was just like gonna be just she was gonna be a boss. She was gonna be she was gonna be so sick. And I started writing this chapter, and I was like, dang, I feel like I would just be so much more sad about this set of circumstances than she's being right now. And I tried writing her like as a boss, and it just wasn't happening. Like Max brought up with his discovery writing, like the ability to discovery write and kind of change and alter things on the fly has been a bit of a surprise for me. But I she's still a boss, but I am like changing up a little bit of how she would react to certain sets of circumstances, and it like totally brought the chapter and that character's POV to life, and being able to like change things on the fly like that has been like really surprising. I'm not like religiously sticking to the outline that I initially had, which has surprised me, I guess.
I definitely understand that. Like, I think you have to be willing to be surprised when it comes to like really carrying out the writing that you want, like that you ultimately want, and that transforms over time too. Like, as I've been coming up with the additional concepts for the other stories and have been trying to like kind of get an idea of the tropes, because obviously it's contemporary romance, you gotta have tropes. As I've been trying to flesh this out, like I've actually realized that like I have been very surprised by what I found going through that process. Like, there have definitely been times where I found that I really, really don't like a trope, but then I'm like, you know what? I don't know if I understand this as well as I think I do. So I'll go and I'll read like an example of that trope, and then I fall in love with it, and I'm like, okay, I get it now. I get it. I get it. I love that you guys brought up like very good points of like it's okay and it's good to be surprised sometimes by the process that you're undergoing as you're writing.
I think this is probably a good time for us to transition into our closing segment of just our word count check-in.
Weekly word count check-in. Yikes.
And then we'll call this episode to a close. It's a rough week for all of us.
Yeah.
I know.
It was a brutal week for all three of us, I think.
I wrote about 500 words, I believe.
I wrote about
I have
400.
written-
Yeah.
That's good. I wrote 0. I had a horrible week at work. We're fine. Everything's gonna be fine. It's gonna be great. You know, it was a horrible week at work, and that took up a lot of my time.
The good news is we just spent, an hour talking about being motivated and inspired. So
Yeah.
hopefully that'll
This next
transition into the
week.
rest of our week.
Yeah, this next week we're all gonna be like in the 4-digit range easily.
That's right.
I will say, while excuses aren't really real, I have an excuse for this week. I was deathly ill this week for a couple of
That's
days.
true. That's true.
And then so was some close family members, including some of the people that live in my house with me. So we've all just been kind of like rotating. We had this wave of sickness just come through like my whole neighborhood. We got it. Everybody in my house got it. It was a rough week, but I think we're all feeling a lot better now. And this next week, we're going to crush it.
That's the hope. That is the hope. I think, honestly, taking the time to really just focus on work this last week is going to give me the bandwidth that I need this week to accomplish some writing. That's something I also have to just throw in there, just as kind of my closer, is that it looks different from week to week, but sometimes, like, really just investing in whatever it is that you need is going to ultimately be the best thing for you and your creative process. And that's something that I think is important to mention. So, I may not have gotten anything writing done, writing on the writing side of things done, but I'm very grateful because I get to come into this week with new eyes. And I'm pretty excited about what will kind of transpire throughout the next couple days.
Okay, and
Alrighty.
scene.